At 18, Marcus Cole had $217, a canvas duffel bag with a broken zipper, and 45 minutes to be off his stepfather's property before the sheriff came back. He stood on the gravel shoulder of Route 11 with his thumb out and his jaw set. 3 days later, a lawyer in Harrisburg told him his uncle Walter had died 6 months ago and left him an abandoned drive-in theater outside a town called Briar Creek, population 900 and change. Marcus had met Walter twice in his life, but when he pried open the service panel behind the projection booth's back wall, he found something Walter had spent 30 years quietly building, something Marcus's stepfather had spent just as long making sure he would never find. The eviction had been legal. Marcus knew that much before the family court judge even looked up from the folder. His mother had been dead 11 months. The house belonged to Dennis Farrow, his stepfather, and Dennis had made it clear at the funeral that the arrangement was temporary. Marcus had finished his senior year sleeping on a cot in the basement laundry room, the air thick with mildew and the smell of dryer lint. He worked weekend shifts at a tire shop on the east side of town, saved what he could, and kept his head down. On the morning of July 9th, Dennis came down the basement steps with a sheriff's deputy named Kuhlman. Kuhlman had a mustache the color of cigarette ash and kept his hands on his belt. Dennis stood 2 steps up, arms folded across his chest. "You got till noon," Dennis said. Marcus looked at Kuhlman. "I got rights." "You're 18, Kuhlman said. "You got the right to leave peacefully." Marcus packed the duffel in 6 minutes. 2 pairs of jeans, 4 shirts, a winter coat his mother had bought him sophomore year, a small wooden box that held his birth certificate, his diploma, and a photograph of his mother standing in front of a house he didn't recognize. He took a socket set from the garage shelf on his way out. Dennis saw him and said nothing. He walked 4 miles into town and spent $11 on a Greyhound ticket to Harrisburg. He had no plan. No friends with couches, no relatives he could name. He sat in the back of the bus with the duffel between his feet and watched Pennsylvania flatten out into farmland and low hills. At the station in Harrisburg, he bought a gas station sandwich and a cup of coffee and sat on a bench near the payphones. That was when a man in a gray suit walked up and said, "You Marcus Cole?" Marcus looked up. The man was 50, maybe older, with reading glasses hanging from a cord around his neck. He carried a leather briefcase that looked older than Marcus. "Depends," Marcus said. The man sat down without asking. "My name's Arthur Pembroke. I'm an estate attorney. I've been trying to reach you for 3 months." Marcus said nothing. Pembroke opened the briefcase and took out a manila folder. "Your uncle, Walter Cole, passed in February. You're listed as sole beneficiary in his will." "I don't have an uncle." "You did," Pembroke said. "Your mother's brother. He left you property." Marcus looked at the folder. "What kind of property?" "A drive-in theater," Pembroke said. 43 acres, Briar Creek, about 2 hours west of here. He slid a single sheet of paper across the bench. It was a deed, signed and notarized. Walter James Cole to Marcus Anthony Cole. Transfer on death. Marcus read it twice. "Why?" "I don't know," Pembroke said. "He didn't say, just that it goes to you, free and clear." "What's it worth?" Pembroke adjusted his glasses. "In its current condition? Not much. It's been closed since 1989. No power, no water service. The township assessed it at $61,000, but that's mostly land value." Marcus folded the paper and put it in his coat pocket. "Where is it?" "Route 11, west past Colton, then south on County Road 4. About a mile past the turnoff to the quarry." Pembroke handed him a business card and a set of keys on a steel ring. "There's a gate. These should open it. If you decide to sell, call me. I can connect you with a buyer." "Who'd want it?" Pembroke stood and closed the briefcase. "Developers, land speculators, it's cheap acreage." He paused. "Your uncle paid the property taxes through the end of next year. After that, it's on you." Marcus watched him walk away. He sat on the bench for another 20 minutes, turning the keys over in his hand. Then he went back to the ticket counter and asked how far $200 would get him toward Briar Creek. The bus dropped him in Colton at 7:15 in the evening. The sky was the color of old newsprint. He walked south along County Road 4 with the duffel slung over one shoulder, passing fields of soybeans and a shuttered grain elevator with most of its windows gone. A pickup truck slowed as it passed him, the driver looking him over, but it didn't stop. He found the turnoff just before full dark. A gravel access road, rutted and overgrown, with a chain-link gate hanging open on one hinge. A weathered sign, nailed to a post, read, "Starlight Drive-In" in faded red letters. Someone had spray-painted over it years ago, but the paint had flaked away. Marcus walked up the drive. Gravel crunched under his boots. The road curved through a stand of scrub pine and opened into a wide dirt lot, maybe 2 acres, bordered by a low berm on 3 sides. At the far end stood the screen. It was massive, 60 feet tall, 100 feet wide, supported by a lattice of steel beams that had rusted to the color of dried blood. The plywood face of the screen was warped and split, sections missing entirely. Behind it, just visible in the failing light, was a small cinder block building with a pitched roof. Marcus crossed the lot. Thistle and wild onion had broken through the gravel in patches. He counted the remains of speaker posts, most of them snapped off at ground level. A few still stood, their metal poles bent and cables long gone. The cinder block building had a single steel door with a hasp lock. Marcus tried the keys. The third one turned. The door opened with a scrape of rust on concrete. Inside, the air was cool and stale. He felt along the wall and found a light switch. Nothing. He pulled a disposable lighter from his pocket and flicked it. The room was small, maybe 12 by 15. Concrete floor, unfinished walls. Against the left wall was a wooden workbench with a vise bolted to one end. Above it, pegboard with the shadows of tools that were no longer there. In the corner was a metal folding chair and a card table with one leg propped up on a chunk of 2x4. On the table was a Coleman lantern and a box of matches. Marcus lit the lantern. Warm light filled the room. To his right was a narrow doorway with no door. He stepped through. The projection booth. 2 old 35mm projectors stood on elevated mounts, their film reels still in place, stripped gears visible through open housings. The portholes in the front wall looked out over the lot toward the screen. Beneath the windows was a long shelf cluttered with film canisters, splicing tape, a rotary phone with no cord, and a coffee can full of screws. Marcus set the lantern on the shelf. He walked the perimeter of the room, running his hand along the wall. The plaster was cracked in places, water-stained near the ceiling. Near the back corner, behind one of the projectors, he noticed a seam. He crouched and touched it. The baseboard was set a 1/4 inch proud of the wall. He pressed it. Nothing. He pressed harder, and it shifted. He pulled the pry bar from the socket set in his duffel and worked the edge into the seam. The baseboard popped free, and behind it was a steel panel about 2 feet square, held in place by 4 flathead screws. Marcus used a screwdriver from the set and removed the screws one by one. The panel came away. Behind it was a shallow compartment lined with sheet metal. Inside was a lockbox. It was gray steel, about the size of a shoebox with a keyed latch. Marcus pulled it out and set it on the floor. He tried the keys from the ring Pembroke had given him. The smallest one fit. The latch clicked open. Inside were 3 things: a bundle of envelopes bound with twine, a brass key on a short chain, with a tag that read, Unit 37, Stokeep Mini Storage, Colton, and a folded letter written on lined paper in blue ink. Marcus unfolded the letter. His hands were steady. The letter read, Marcus, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and Pembroke found you. I'm glad. I wasn't sure he would. I'm your mother's brother. You met me twice. Once when you were 4, once when you were 9. I'm sorry it wasn't more. Your stepfather made it clear I wasn't welcome, and your mother was caught in the middle. I didn't push. I should have. I bought this place in 1985. Paid $16,000 for it, cash. It was already dying. The last movie I showed was in July of '89, Field of Dreams, if you're curious. After that, the market dried up. VHS killed us. I kept the land because it was mine and because I thought someday you might need it. I worked road construction for 30 years. I saved what I could. I didn't have kids. I didn't have a wife. I had a house in Colton, a truck, and this place. The house is sold. The truck's gone. What's left is yours. I don't know what kind of man you grew up to be, but I know your mother loved you more than anything in this world. She called me once, 2 years before she died, and told me you were good, that you worked hard, that you didn't complain. She was proud of you. I know you didn't have it easy. I know Dennis wasn't kind. I'm sorry I didn't step in. The key in this box will get you into a storage unit in Colton. Everything else I had to leave you is there. It's not much, but it's yours. Do what you want with it. Sell it, keep it, burn it. I don't care. I just wanted to make sure it got to you and not to him. Take care of yourself, Marcus. Walter Marcus read the letter twice. Then he folded it and set it on the floor beside the lockbox. He sat with his back against the wall and the lantern beside him, staring at the brass key in his hand. Outside, the wind picked up. It rattled the loose plywood on the screen and whispered through the gaps in the projection booth's walls. The light from the lantern threw long shadows across the projectors, across the film canisters and the phone and the coffee can full of screws. Marcus didn't cry. He didn't move. He sat in the booth with the letter beside him and the key warm in his palm. And for the first time in 11 months, he let himself believe that someone had thought about him, that someone had planned for him, that someone, somewhere, had cared whether he made it or not. He slept on the concrete floor that night, his coat rolled up under his head, the lockbox within arm's reach. In the morning, Marcus walked back to Colton. The air was cool and smelled like cut hay. He passed a woman in a sun hat pulling weeds from a ditch, and a man on a riding mower who lifted 2 fingers from the wheel as Marcus went by. The town was a 4-block grid centered on a single stoplight, a diner called the Bluebird, a True Value hardware store, a post office, a bar with the windows painted over. At the far end of Main Street was a low cinder block building with a sign that read, Stow Keep Mini Storage. The office was a 10 by 10 room with a counter, a fan, and a woman in her 60s reading a paperback. She had short gray hair and glasses on a beaded chain. She looked up when Marcus walked in. "Help you?" Marcus set the brass key on the counter. "I need to get into Unit 37. She glanced at the key, then at him. "You Walter's nephew?" "Yeah." She nodded slowly. "Pembroke said you might come by." She opened a drawer and pulled out a clipboard. "Sign here." Marcus signed. She handed him a laminated card with the gate code and pointed out the window. "Third row, middle. You need a hand with anything?" "No, ma'am. Name's Diane," she said. "Let me know if you do." Marcus walked out to the rows of units. They were identical, aluminum roll-up doors, concrete pads, padlocks. He found Unit 37 and used the key. The door rolled up with a metallic clatter. Inside was a 10 by 10 space, clean and dry. A bare bulb hung from the ceiling on a pull chain. Marcus tugged it, and light flooded the unit. Against the back wall were 6 cardboard boxes, neatly stacked. A label on each one, written in the same blue ink as the letter. Marcus. Tools, Marcus. Clothes. Marcus. Books. Marcus. Personal. Marcus. Financial. Marcus. For later. Marcus opened the first box. Inside were tools, a full socket set, metric and standard, a cordless drill with 2 batteries, a framing hammer with a hickory handle, a tape measure, a level, a utility knife, a set of hex keys, everything clean, oiled, and wrapped in shop towels. He opened the second box. Work clothes, 4 pairs of Carhartt pants, tags still on, 3 flannel shirts, a insulated vest, steel-toed boots, size 10, his size. The third box held books, shop manuals, a guide to small engine repair, a handbook on basic wiring, a copy of Walden with a receipt tucked inside as a bookmark, dated 1996. The fourth box, marked personal, held photographs. Most were of his mother. As a girl, maybe 12, standing beside a man Marcus didn't recognize. As a teenager, arms around a boy in a Letterman jacket. As a young woman, holding an infant, Marcus, in front of a small house with blue shutters. There was one photograph of Walter. He was younger, maybe 40, standing beside a Chevy pickup with primer spots on the door. He wore a t-shirt and work boots and squinted into the sun. He looked tired. Marcus set the photographs aside and opened the fifth box. Financial. Inside were envelopes, organized by year. He opened the one marked 1998. Bank statements, savings account in Walter's name. Deposits every 2 weeks, small amounts, $30, $50, $40. Withdrawals every few months, always to the same place. A trust account at Briar Creek Savings and Loan, established in Marcus's name. Marcus pulled out the most recent statement, dated January of this year. The balance was $73,412. He sat down on the concrete pad, the statement in his hand, and stared at the number until it stopped feeling like a number and started feeling like 30 years of road work. 30 years of depositing $40 at a time. 30 years of a man he'd met twice deciding that Marcus mattered. He opened the last box, for later. Inside was a single envelope, sealed, with his name on the front in Walter's handwriting. Marcus didn't open it, not yet. He set it on top of the other boxes, pulled the door down, and locked it. Then he walked back into town, bought a cup of coffee and a breakfast sandwich at the Bluebird, and sat at the counter while he figured out what came next. A man in a canvas jacket sat 2 stools down, eating eggs and toast. He glanced at Marcus once, then went back to his plate. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with a name tag that read Jen, refilled Marcus's coffee without asking. "You're Walter's boy," she said. Marcus looked up. "Nephew." "Close enough," Jen said. "He used to come in here every Sunday. Black coffee, 1 egg, white toast. Sat right where you're sitting." Marcus didn't know what to say. Jen wiped the counter. "He was a good man. Quiet but good. Helped my son replace a transmission once. Didn't charge him a dime." The man in the canvas jacket spoke without looking up. "Helped me reshingle my barn in '03. Worked all weekend." Jen nodded. "He did that. Helped a lot of people." Marcus wrapped his hands around the coffee cup. "I didn't really know him." "Well," Jen said, "now you got time to figure out who he was." Marcus finished his sandwich, left a $5 bill on the counter, and walked back out into the morning. He spent the rest of the day at the drive-in. He walked the lot, counting speaker posts and checking the fence line. The berm on the west side had eroded, and runoff had carved a shallow ditch through the gravel. The screen's support beams were solid, though rust had eaten through the crossbars in 2 places. The plywood facing was a loss. Warped, split, soft with rot. The projection booth had potential. The roof was intact. The concrete floor was level. The projectors were junk, but the mounts were steel and could be unbolted. He found a spigot on the outside of the building. He turned the handle. Nothing. Inside, he checked the breaker box. Empty. No panel. No breakers. Just an empty metal box with knockouts and a mess of old cloth-wrapped wire. He made a list on the back of a receipt. Water service, electrical service, roof patch, replace screen plywood. Clear lot. Find out what the zoning allows. He sat on the steps of the projection booth as the sun went down and looked out over the empty lot. Fireflies rose from the thistle. Somewhere in the pines, a mourning dove called. He thought about the $73,000. He thought about the tools, the clothes, the photographs. He thought about the letter, still sealed, still waiting in the storage unit. He thought about his mother, standing in front of a house he didn't recognize, holding him as an infant, smiling. He thought about Walter, squinting into the sun beside a truck with primer on the door. And he thought about what it meant that a man he'd barely known had spent 3 decades making sure Marcus had a chance. He didn't have an answer yet, but he had a place to start. The next morning, Marcus walked back into Colton and found the True Value on Main Street. It was a narrow storefront with a wooden floor that creaked and smelled like machine oil and fertilizer. The aisles were tight and crowded, screws in bins, hammers on pegboard, coils of rope hanging from hooks. Behind the counter was a man in his 70s, bald except for a fringe of white hair, wearing a canvas apron with the pockets full of pencils. He was writing in a ledger with a mechanical pencil, his handwriting small and precise. He looked up when Marcus walked in. "Help you find something?" "I need a pry bar," Marcus said, "and a utility blade." The man nodded toward the back. "Aisle 3, left side." Marcus found the tools and brought them to the counter. The man rang them up on an old brass register, the kind with keys that clacked. $12.40, the man said. Marcus handed him a 20. The man made change and slid it across the counter. Then he looked at Marcus for a long moment. "You're Walter's nephew." It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir," Marcus said. The man nodded. "Figured. You look like him around the eyes." He held out a hand. "Name's Earl Hutchins. I own this place." Marcus shook his hand. "Marcus Cole." "I know," Earl said. "Walter talked about you." Marcus blinked. "He did?" "Not a lot," Earl said, "but enough. He kept a picture of you in his wallet. Told me once you were good with your hands." "I worked in a tire shop," Marcus said. "That counts." Earl leaned against the counter. "What are you planning to do with the Starlight?" "I don't know yet," Marcus said. "Fix it up maybe, see what it's worth." Earl nodded slowly. "It's good land. Flat, well-drained. You could sell it to a developer, make some money." "Could," Marcus said. Earl watched him. "But," Marcus picked up the pry bar, "I want to see what's there first." Earl smiled. It was a small smile, but it reached his eyes. "Walter said you were stubborn." Marcus almost smiled back. Earl reached under the counter and pulled out a business card. "If you need help, tools, materials, advice, you come see me. I knew your uncle 30 years. He helped me more times than I can count. I owe him." Marcus took the card. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Earl said. "Just bring my tools back when you're done." Marcus walked out with the pry bar and the blade and a feeling in his chest he couldn't name. That afternoon, he went back to the storage unit and opened the last box. He sat on the concrete pad with the envelope in his hands. The seal was thick, the paper expensive. He slid his thumb under the flap and tore it open. Inside were 3 pages, handwritten, dated February 3rd of this year. Marcus unfolded them and began to read. "Marcus, if you open this one, you've already found the account. You've seen the statements. You're probably wondering why. I'm going to tell you, your mother's name was Caroline. You know that. What you don't know is that she called me 3 weeks before she died. It was late, maybe 10 at night. And she was crying. She told me she was sick, that the doctors said it was cancer, and that it had spread. She told me she didn't have much time. She told me she was scared. Not of dying, of leaving you. She said Dennis wouldn't take care of you, that he'd throw you out the day you turned 18, maybe sooner. She said you were smart and good and strong, but that you didn't have anybody. She asked me to help. I told her I would. She died 4 weeks later. I wasn't at the funeral. Dennis made sure of that. But I started putting money away the day after she called. I opened the account in your name. I worked every job I could get, road crews, demo, weekend side work. I put away $40, $50, $60 a week. Sometimes more. I didn't do it because I'm a saint. I did it because Caroline asked me to, and because I owed her. When we were kids, I was the one who screwed up. I was the one who got in fights, who dropped out of school, who couldn't hold a job. Caroline was the one who kept me fed, who let me sleep on her couch when I got evicted, who loaned me money she didn't have. She saved my life more than once, and I never paid her back. So when she asked me to take care of you, I said yes. I bought the drive-in because I needed something to leave you that Dennis couldn't touch. Something with your name on it, clean and clear. I kept putting money in the account because I wanted you to have options. I wanted you to have a chance. I don't know what kind of life you've had. I hope it was better than I think it was. But if it wasn't, if Dennis was cruel, if you were alone, if you didn't have help, I want you to know that your mother loved you. She fought for you. And she made sure, even after she was gone, that somebody was looking out for you, that somebody was me. I'm sorry I wasn't there in person. I'm sorry I couldn't do more. But I did what I could, and I hope it's enough. The money is yours. The land is yours. The tools, the clothes, the books, all of it. Do what you want with it. Build something, sell it, walk away. I don't care. I just wanted to make sure you had a choice. Your mother loved you every single day. So did I. Walter Marcus sat with the letter in his lap and the wind moving through the pines and the sound of a dog barking somewhere far off. He read the letter again. Then he folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope. He sat there until the light began to fail. Then he stood, locked the unit, and walked back to the drive-in. He spent the night in the projection booth with the Coleman lantern burning and the letter on the floor beside him. He didn't sleep much. He watched the shadows on the walls and thought about his mother, about Walter, about 30 years of $40 deposits. In the morning, he made instant coffee on a camp stove he'd found in one of the boxes and ate a peanut butter sandwich standing in the doorway of the booth, looking out over the empty lot. Then he picked up the pry bar and went to work. He started with the baseboard along the back wall of the projection booth, not because it needed immediate attention, but because he couldn't stop thinking about the seam. He'd found one hidden panel. The building was small but old, and old buildings kept secrets the way old people did, quietly, in the corners, behind the ordinary things. He worked the pry bar along the south wall, tapping every 18 inches, listening for the hollow note that would tell him something was different behind the plaster. He found it on the third morning. Not a panel this time. A door. It had been painted over so many times that the seam was barely visible. Just a faint rectangle in the plaster, about 6 feet tall and 30 inches wide, in the corner where the projection booth's back wall met the exterior cinder block. The hinges had been filled in with caulk and painted. The knob had been removed and the hole plastered over. If the light from the Coleman hadn't hit the wall at a low angle that morning, Marcus might have walked past it another dozen times. He set down his coffee and pressed his palm flat against the surface. It moved. Just slightly. A quarter-inch of give that solid plaster walls don't have. He found the edge with the pry bar and worked carefully, not wanting to damage whatever was on the other side. The paint cracked. The plaster dust fell in a fine white line. He worked the bar around the perimeter, popping the seal inch by inch, until the door swung inward with a slow, heavy groan that sounded like something waking up. The smell hit him first. Cedar. Old wood and cedar and something faintly metallic, like machine oil or gun bluing. Not damp, not rotten. Dry and preserved, the way a sealed room gets when nobody has touched it in years. Marcus held up the lantern. The room was large, much larger than the projection booth itself, which meant it extended into a section of the building that had no exterior windows, no visible entry. From outside, that section had looked like a utility crawl space or an equipment bump out. From inside, it was a workshop. He stepped through the doorway. The floor was poured concrete, smooth and swept. The walls were wood-paneled, real tongue and groove pine, not the cheap composite stuff, and lined with pegboard and shelving. The shelving was hand-built, the joints dovetailed, the edges routed clean. A workbench ran the full length of the left wall, 12 feet at least, with a vise at each end and a row of drawers underneath. Above it, every tool had a place. The pegboard was labeled, not with tape but with small brass plates, each one engraved: chisels, planes, marking gauges, spokeshave, rasps, card scrapers. The tools were still there, every one of them clean and oiled, in their places. Marcus walked slowly around the perimeter of the room, holding the lantern. He didn't touch anything yet. Against the right wall were 6 pieces of furniture, not raw lumber, not unfinished projects. Finished pieces: a rocking chair with a caned seat, a blanket chest, cherry wood, with carved detail along the lid, a small writing desk with 3 drawers and tapered legs, 2 side tables, matched, walnut with breadboard ends, and a bookcase, full height, 6 shelves, made from what looked like reclaimed oak, the grain showing through a thin coat of oil. Each piece had a tag attached, small manila tags, the kind you find on keyed envelopes tied with cotton string. Marcus crouched beside the rocking chair and turned its tag over. For Marcus. Made 1994. White oak. For the porch someday, or wherever you end up sitting still long enough to read a good book. His hand went still. He moved to the blanket chest. Its tag read, "For Marcus. Made 2000 zonv." 1. Cherry from the Harlan Springs sawmill. Your grandmother had one just like this. I made this from memory. The writing desk. For Marcus. Made 2007. Walnut. You might need a place to write things down. Letters, plans, whatever comes. The side tables. For Marcus. Made 2011. Both of them, because one side table without the other one is just set. The bookcase. For Marcus. Made 2015. Oak reclaimed from the old Colton schoolhouse when they tore it down. Some things ought to be kept. Marcus stood in the middle of the workshop with the lantern in his hand and the light falling across 30 years of woodwork. Walter had made him furniture, 1 piece at a time, across 2 decades, not knowing if Marcus would ever show up to claim it, not knowing what kind of man he would be, not knowing whether Pembroke would find him or Dennis would intercept the deed or the taxes would go unpaid and the land would revert to the county. Not knowing any of it, just building year after year, piece after piece, in a sealed room behind a painted-over door. Marcus set the lantern on the workbench. He put his hands on the edge of the bench and stood there, head down, breathing slowly. He didn't cry. He pressed the heels of his hands into the bench edge until his knuckles went white. Then he straightened up and wiped his face on the back of his hand and turned around. There were drawers under the bench. He opened the first one, savings bonds, bundled in rubber bands, organized by year. The earliest were dated 1987, the most recent 2019. Each bundle was labeled with the face value and the purchase date in Walter's careful handwriting. Marcus counted the bundles, 19 of them. He pulled out the 1987 bundle. 3 bonds, each for $500, issued in Marcus's name. He opened the second drawer. More envelopes. These were labeled differently. Deed, Starlight Drive-In. Deed, Storage Unit, Stokeep Unit 37. Trust Agreement, Briar Creek Savings and Loan. Tax Receipts, 1989 through present insurance policy. He opened the deed to the drive-in. His name was on it. Marcus Anthony Cole, sole grantee. It was signed, notarized, and stamped. A second copy sat behind it, identical. He opened the trust agreement. The account held $73,412. He'd seen the statement. But reading the trust agreement was different. It was formal language, specific language. Language that said this money cannot be touched by any person other than Marcus Anthony Cole, cannot be seized by creditors, cannot be claimed by a spouse or step-parent or any party not named herein. Walter had protected it. Marcus opened the third drawer. Letters. Dozens of them bundled in twine. Not letters to Marcus. The bundles from the lockbox had been those. These were something else. They were addressed, stamped, and sealed, but never mailed. The top envelope was addressed to Dennis Farrow, 1114 Elm Street, Harrisburg, PA. Marcus turned it over. It was sealed. He set it aside and looked at the rest of the bundle, all addressed to Dennis Farrow. Dates going back to 1991. The most recent was dated March of last year. Walter had written to Dennis, or tried to. 20 years of letters he'd never sent. Marcus put the bundle back in the drawer. He wasn't ready for those yet. He opened the fourth drawer. A single envelope, this one unsealed, this one labeled in Walter's hand. Read this one last. For Marcus. The whole truth. Marcus took the envelope to the workbench stool. He sat under the lantern light with the envelope in his lap and the workshop quiet around him, the smell of cedar and oil filling the air, the finished furniture casting long shadows on the pine walls. He pulled out the letter. It was long. 4 pages, the handwriting smaller than the previous letters, denser, more deliberate. Marcus could tell it had been rewritten. The handwriting was too clean, too even. The handwriting of a man who had drafted this letter many times before getting it right. It was dated February 3rd of this year, the same day as the letter in the storage unit. Marcus, there's more I didn't tell you in the other letter. That one was the short version. This one is the true version. I hope you'll read it all the way through before you decide anything about the property or the money or me. I'll start at the beginning. Your mother and I grew up on a dairy farm outside of Stone Ridge, about 40 miles west of where you're sitting right now. Our father's name was Raymond Cole. He was a hard man, not cruel but hard. We worked from before school until after dark. There wasn't much time for anything soft. I don't think he knew how to be soft. I don't think his father did either. Your mother, Caroline, was different. She was soft in the good way, the way that costs you something. She was the one who got up early to check on the calves, not because she had to, but because she didn't want them to be cold and alone. She was the one who put a blanket over me when I fell asleep on the couch doing homework. She was 10 years old. I was 14. She was already better at being a person than I ever managed. I left the farm at 19. I was angry at everything and I made a lot of bad choices. I won't catalog them all. The short version is that I spent most of my 20s being a burden on anyone who tried to help me. And the person who tried to help me most was your mother. She co-signed a loan I defaulted on. She let me stay at her apartment when I had nowhere to go. She drove 40 miles to bail me out of a county lockup on a Tuesday night without telling anyone. Every time I asked, she came. Every time. I got myself together eventually. The road construction work saved me, not because I liked it, but because it wore me out enough that I didn't have energy left over to ruin things. I worked. I slept. I saved. It was a small life, but it was mine. In 1985, I bought the Starlight. It was a mistake as a business decision, but it was a good mistake. I showed movies for 4 years. I liked the work, setting up the reels, adjusting the focus, watching people sit in their cars and look at the screen. There's something right about that. People in their own little boxes watching a shared thing. I liked being the one who made it possible. When the drive-in died, I kept the land. I didn't know why then. I know why now. You were born in 1987. I held you once, in your mother's hospital room, while Dennis sat in the corner with his arms folded. He didn't like me. I didn't like him. Your mother held my hand after she handed you back and said, "He's a good one, Walt." I believed her. After that, Dennis made it clear I wasn't welcome. He didn't threaten me outright. He was too careful for that. But he made your mother choose. And she had to choose him because she needed the roof and the income, and she didn't have another option. I understood that. I still do. I'm not angry at her. I'm angry at myself for not being in a position to give her another option. Here's the part you don't know. In 1996, your mother called me. Dennis had been offered a job in Harrisburg. Good money, management position, at a manufacturing plant. She was excited. She said it would change everything. They'd have more money, he'd be less stressed, things would be better. She asked if I could help with moving costs. I had $400, I gave her $350. In 2003, she called again. Dennis had an accident at work. Workers' comp dispute. They needed a lawyer. I didn't have much, but I had a little saved. I gave her $800 and drove out to Harrisburg on a Saturday to help her organize the paperwork. Dennis wasn't home. We sat at her kitchen table and I helped her sort through 7 years of medical bills and insurance letters. You were 16. You came in from school and made us both a cup of coffee without being asked. You set mine down in front of me and went back upstairs without a word. That was the second time I saw you. I don't think you knew who I was. Your mother looked at me across the table after you went upstairs and said, "He's a good kid." Same words she'd used in the hospital, like she needed me to know. She died in 2006. The cancer was fast. 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I found out from Pembroke, who had a friend in the Harrisburg County Records Office. I wasn't notified. I wasn't invited. I found her name in the obituaries 3 days after the funeral. I drove out to the cemetery in Harrisburg on a Wednesday morning in November. I put flowers on her grave. Carnations, because that's what the gas station had. I stood there for a long time. Then I drove back to Colton and went to work the next morning. That was the hardest day of my life. But here's what I want you to understand about all of this. I'm not telling you the hard parts to make you feel bad, or to make you angry at Dennis, or to make you feel sorry for me. I'm telling you because you deserve to know the shape of your own life. You deserve to know that you came from something real, a mother who was genuinely good, a family that was broken in some ways but not in all of them. You deserve to know that people who loved you made choices, and some of those choices were wrong, and some were the best they could do. Your mother asked me to look after you. I did it the only way I knew how, quietly, from a distance, with money I earned by hand and wood I shaped by hand and a piece of land I kept for 30 years because I believed someday you'd need it. The workshop behind the projection booth, I hope you found it, holds everything I made for you over the years. I'm not a fast woodworker. I worked evenings and weekends, one piece at a time. I made the rocking chair when you were 7, when I imagined you'd someday be an old man sitting on a porch. I made the blanket chest when you were 14, when I thought about you maybe having a home someday. I made the desk when you were 20, when I thought you might be figuring out what you wanted to do with your life. The bookcase was last. I made it when I got sick and knew I was running out of time. I wanted to leave you something big enough to fill with things that mattered. Everything in this workshop is yours. Everything in the storage unit is yours. The money is yours. The land is yours. What I want, and I have no right to want anything. So take this as the wish of a man who knows he's out of time. What I want is for you to do something with it, not sell it. Build something, make something that stays. The land is good. The building is solid. It needs work, but you can do the work. I know you can. The drive-in is gone. That's fine. Movies don't need a drive-in anymore. But the land doesn't have to be empty just because the movie's left. I don't know what you'll make of it. That's not for me to decide. I just wanted to make sure you had the chance to decide. I loved you every single day, Marcus, from the hospital room to the last morning I had. You were my sister's son, and that made you mine, even when I wasn't allowed to be near you. Some things don't need permission. Take care of yourself. Walter P.S. The rocking chair fits best on the south side of the building, facing the lot. In the evening, the light comes through the pines and hits the gravel. Just right. I used to sit out there with a cup of coffee and watch the fireflies come up. It's a good spot. It's yours now. Marcus read the letter once through without stopping. Then he sat with it in his lap and looked at the tools on the pegboard and the furniture along the wall, and the lantern casting its warm circle on the pine planks. He looked at the blanket chest, cherry wood, carved along the lid, and thought about his grandmother, a woman he'd never met, who'd had a chest just like it. He looked at the rocking chair and thought about the word someday, and how Walter had used it over and over again, across 30 years, building furniture for a someday that he'd never see. Outside, the afternoon light was failing. The pine trees at the edge of the lot filtered the last of the sun into long amber stripes across the gravel. Fireflies were beginning to rise from the thistle. Marcus folded the letter and tucked it into the inside pocket of his jacket, close to his chest. He moved the rocking chair through the workshop door and through the projection booth and out the steel door onto the cinder block step. He set it facing south, facing the lot, the way Walter had written. He sat down in it. The caned seat held. The joints were tight and true. It didn't creak. He sat there until the sky went purple and then gray and then dark, watching the fireflies come up from the thistle, holding the arm of the chair. He slept that night with the 4-page letter on the floor beside him and the lantern burning low. If you've made it this far into Marcus's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. The car came up the gravel drive on a Tuesday morning, 6 days after Marcus had moved into the projection booth. It was a white Audi sedan, recently washed, moving slowly enough that the gravel barely kicked up behind it. It parked at the edge of the lot, 50 yards from the booth, and the driver sat inside for a moment before getting out. The man who climbed out was perhaps 55. He wore charcoal slacks and a gray sport coat over a light blue dress shirt, no tie. Tan leather shoes, clean. His hair was silver at the temples, and he held a leather portfolio under one arm. He walked across the lot with the easy stride of someone who had walked into a lot of situations and expected them to go his way. Marcus was on the cinder block step, drinking instant coffee, watching him come. "Marcus Cole?" the man said. "Yeah." The man extended a hand. "My name's Gregory Howell. I'm with Harland Capital Partners." Marcus shook his hand once and let go. Howell looked around the lot. The overgrown thistle, the broken speaker posts, the screen with its missing panels. His expression was controlled, almost neutral, but his eyes moved the way an accountant's eyes do, calculating replacement cost and value per square foot. "Mind if I sit?" Howell said. Marcus gestured toward a broken speaker post. "Nothing to sit on." Howell smiled slightly and stayed standing. "I'll get right to the point. We've been watching this parcel for about 4 years. Good flat acreage, excellent road access, proximity to Route 11. We have a client interested in developing a mixed-use retail corridor along this stretch of County Road 4. "Mixed-use retail," Marcus said. "Strip mall, gas station, possibly a drive-through. Basic commercial infrastructure." Howell opened the portfolio. "We'd be prepared to offer $220,000 for the parcel. That's well above assessed value." Marcus looked at the number on the page. Then he looked out at the lot. A blackbird had landed on one of the broken speaker posts and was watching them both. "Not interested," Marcus said. Howell nodded as if he'd expected this. "I understand. It's a significant decision, but I'd encourage you to consider." I said no. Howell closed the portfolio. He didn't look offended. He looked like a man who had been told no before and considered it a temporary condition. "There are zoning conversations happening along this corridor," he said, his tone still pleasant. "The township board meets in 6 weeks. Some of the language around agricultural and mixed residential designations may be changing. Could affect what you're allowed to do with the property." He reached into his jacket and produced a business card, holding it out. "If your plans change, or if the zoning picture shifts, I hope you'll give me a call." Marcus took the card. Howell looked around the lot one more time, just briefly, and then walked back to the Audi. He backed down the gravel drive slowly and disappeared around the curve of the pines. Marcus looked at the business card. Gregory Howell, Harland Capital Partners, Acquisitions and Development. A phone number, an email, a small logo in the corner. He set it on the step beside his coffee cup. Zoning conversations. 6 weeks. He didn't know exactly what that meant, but he knew what it felt like. It felt like a door that was still open but had started swinging closed. He sat on the step for a long time after Howell's car was gone, turning the business card over in his hand. He thought about $73,000 and what that could do if he sold and added the purchase price. He thought about Walter's handwriting on those furniture tags. For Marcus. Some things ought to be kept. He pressed the card flat against the cinder block and looked out at the lot. The Blackbird was still on the speaker post. It hadn't moved. That evening, Marcus drove the 38 miles to Briar Creek Savings and Loan in his rented truck and signed the paperwork to access the trust account Walter had established. The branch manager, a quiet woman named Patricia, who wore her reading glasses on a chain identical to Diane's at the storage place, processed the transfer authorization without comment. She slid the paperwork across the desk. Marcus signed, and she stamped 3 forms and filed them in a manila folder. "The funds will be fully accessible Thursday morning," she said. "All $73,412. "Thank you," Marcus said. She looked at him for a moment. Walter Cole set this up in 1989. He came in to update the beneficiary documents every few years. He was always very careful about it. She paused. He was a thorough man. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus said. She slid a final form across. "This one just confirms your contact information." Marcus filled it out, signed it, slid it back. As he stood to go, Patricia said, without looking up from her paperwork, "I hope you'll do something nice with it." "I'm working on it," Marcus said. He drove back to Briar Creek under a sky full of stars, the windows down, the night air smelling of turned earth and something floral he couldn't identify. He turned south on County Road 4, and the truck's headlights swept the gravel drive and the pines and the dark bulk of the screen against the sky. He sat in the parked truck for a while before going inside. He thought about Howell's card on the step, about zoning conversations and 6 weeks, about the township board and what a developer with a portfolio and a clean Audi could do to a piece of land if the person holding it didn't know enough to fight back. He thought about Earl Hutchins at the True Value and the way Earl had said, "Walter talked about you." He reached across the seat and picked up Earl's business card from the cup holder. In the morning, he decided he was going back to the hardware store. Earl was at the counter when Marcus walked in, writing in the ledger. He looked up, capped his mechanical pencil, and waited. "I need some advice," Marcus said. Earl set down the pencil. "Close the door." Marcus closed it. Earl came around the counter and led him to the back of the store, past the garden chemicals and the rope display, to a small room that functioned as an office, a desk, 2 wooden chairs, a coffee maker that had seen decades of use. Earl poured 2 cups and handed one across. "Sit down," Earl said. Marcus sat. He told Earl about Howell, about the Audi, the portfolio, the $220,000, the zoning comment. He told it plain. No editorializing. Earl listened without interrupting. He turned his coffee cup in a slow circle on the desk while Marcus talked, a habit that seemed involuntary. When Marcus finished, Earl sat back. "Gregory Howell," he said. "Harlan Capital. You know him?" "I know of him," Earl said. "He bought the old feed store lot off Route 9 in 2018. Paid the owner $140,000, told him it was fair. Assessed value was $90. Owner thought he'd done well." Earl paused. 6 months later, the rezoning went through. Howell flipped it to a gas station developer for $380. Marcus said nothing. "The Township Board," Earl said, "has 2 members who have voted for every commercial rezoning in the last 12 years. They're not corrupt exactly. They believe commercial development means tax revenue, and tax revenue means the township stays solvent. They're not wrong about that, but they have a pattern." "So what can I do?" Marcus said. Earl picked up his pencil again, not to write, just to hold. "First thing, you need to know what Walter's deed says about use restrictions. Pembroke should have that. Second thing, you need to come to the Township Board meeting before the zoning vote and show them what you're planning to do with the property." He looked at Marcus. "You have a plan?" Marcus looked at his hands. "I'm working on one." Earl nodded. "Work faster." He set the pencil down. Walter was quiet his whole life. He helped people and never made noise about it. But quiet didn't mean passive. He knew what he was doing. He left you that land because he believed you'd find a reason to keep it. He looked at Marcus directly. "Have you found one yet?" Marcus looked up. He thought about the rocking chair and the fireflies and the south-facing light coming through the pines in the evening. He thought about the $73,000 and the savings bonds and the handwritten furniture tags. "Yeah," he said. "I think I have." Earl nodded once. He stood and walked back to the front of the store. He unlocked a cabinet behind the counter and took out a phone. He dialed a number from memory and held the receiver out to Marcus. "That's Gail Pemberton," he said. "She's been practicing land use law in this county for 31 years. She knew Walter. She won't charge you full rate." He handed Marcus the receiver. "Tell her everything you told me." Marcus took the phone. He didn't thank Earl again. He just started talking. Gail Pemberton's office was above the pharmacy on Main Street, a steep wooden staircase and a door with frosted glass. She was 63, small, with close-cropped white hair and the kind of stillness that comes from spending 30 years in rooms where people are afraid. She wore reading glasses on a beaded chain. Marcus noted that every woman in Colton seemed to wear their glasses on a chain, and she listened to Marcus for 40 minutes without once interrupting. Then she said, "Let me see the deed." Marcus had brought copies. She read them carefully, turning the pages without hurry. "There's a use restriction here," she said, pointing. "Grantor's covenant. Walter put it in before he transferred. The land may not be subdivided or converted to commercial use without the written consent of the Colton Township Historic Sites Committee." She looked at Marcus over her glasses. "Did you know about this?" "No," Marcus said. "The drive-in is listed on the county's preliminary historic sites register. It's not a full designation, but it's enough to trigger the covenant." She set the deed down. "Howell can push for a rezoning vote, but the covenant complicates it significantly. He'd need to invalidate the covenant first, which means a legal challenge, which means time and money and a public record." "Will he do it?" Gail folded her hands on the desk. "He might, if he thinks the land is worth enough." She paused. "But he'll need the Township Board on his side, and the board will need a public rationale." She looked at Marcus. "Which is why you need to show up to that meeting with a plan that gives the board a reason to say no to him." "I have a plan," Marcus said. "I think." "Then you'd better think faster," Gail said. "The board meets in 5 weeks. I can file a motion to preserve the covenant status, which buys us time, but the clock is running." She wrote a number on a notepad and slid it across the desk. My retainer for the filing is $900. If we go to a full hearing, there'll be more. She looked at him. Can you manage it? Yes, Marcus said. She nodded. Then I'll start Monday. She took her glasses off and set them on the desk. Walter was a client of mine for 12 years. He was meticulous. He had a plan for this land, Marcus. He just needed you to execute it. She put her glasses back on. So go execute it. Marcus drove back to the Starlight in the afternoon light. He parked and sat in the truck looking at the lot, the screen, the pines, the cinder block building. He sat for a long time. Then he got out and went inside and pulled out a piece of paper and a pen from the box marked Marcus, Personal. He wrote at the top, Plan for the Starlight. He sat for a minute, pen in hand. Then he started writing. The formal letter arrived on a Thursday, slid under the steel door of the projection booth sometime before Marcus woke up. He found it when he stepped outside to make coffee on the camp stove. A white envelope, clean and crisp against the concrete threshold, with the Colton Township seal in the upper left corner. He opened it standing up. It was a notice of zoning review dated October 14th. The language was bureaucratic and careful, but the meaning was plain. Harland Capital Partners had filed a petition requesting reclassification of the Starlight Drive-In parcel from rural residential to commercial mixed use. A public hearing had been scheduled for November 8th before the Colton Township Zoning Board. Property owners within 500 feet had been notified. The petitioner's representative would present the application. Any party with standing to contest the application could appear and present testimony. Marcus read it twice. Then he folded it and put it in his jacket pocket next to Walter's long letter. He sat on the cinder block step with his coffee and looked out at the lot. The thistle was dying back now that October had arrived, browning at the tips, collapsing in on itself. The mornings were cold enough to see his breath. He'd been sleeping in the projection booth for 3 weeks, and he'd patched the 2 worst gaps in the walls with spray foam and a piece of plywood he'd bought at Earl's store. He'd gotten the water service restored, a $43 reconnection fee plus a backflow inspection the county required. And he'd been running an extension cord from a temporary utility hookup he'd arranged through the township office at a cost of $18 a month. He had a rough plan on paper. He'd talked it through with Gail Pemberton twice. He'd been to the township office and pulled the zoning maps and the historic sites register documentation. He knew what he wanted to do with the land, and he knew it was possible, and he knew he had enough money to start it. But none of that meant much if Howell got the board to vote before Marcus could show them something real. He thought about walking away. The thought came and went quickly, but he let himself have it. The full version, standing in the truck counting the money. $73,000 plus the $220,000 Howell was offering. Nearly $300,000. A number that would change the shape of his life in ways he couldn't fully imagine. New city. Clean apartment. A real start, the kind that didn't begin with sleeping on a concrete floor. He sat with that thought for a long time. Then he thought about the rocking chair, and the blanket chest, and the 4-page letter folded in his pocket. He thought about 30 years of $40 deposits. He thought about Walter driving 40 miles to bail him out of nothing, to a cemetery in Harrisburg, carnations from a gas station, standing at his sister's grave on a Wednesday morning in November, alone. Some things ought to be kept. He put the notice in the glove box of the truck and drove to Earl's store. Earl was on a stepladder, reorganizing the top shelf of the paint aisle. He climbed down when he saw Marcus's face. "Zoning notice?" Earl said. "November 8th. Earl nodded. He picked up the mechanical pencil from behind his ear and tapped it against the shelf twice, thinking. "Gail file the covenant motion?" "Monday," Marcus said. "Good." Earl looked at him. "You thinking about selling?" It wasn't a question. Marcus looked at the floor. "I thought about it." Earl said nothing for a moment. He put the pencil back behind his ear and picked up the can of paint he'd been moving and set it on the shelf with a decisive click. Walter didn't think about it, Earl said. 30 years of people telling him that land was worthless and he ought to sell. Developers, tax assessors, his own accountant twice. He looked at Marcus. He kept it because he believed the right person would know what to do with it. He believed that person was you. Marcus looked up. Now, Earl said, turning back to the shelf, are you the right person or not? Marcus stood there a moment. I need 2x4s, he said. 20 of them, and a roll of house wrap. Earl smiled with his back turned. Aisle 7. I'll put it on Walter's account and you can square it up when you're ready. Marcus was back at the Starlight by 9 that morning, unloading lumber from the truck, when he heard footsteps on the gravel drive. He turned. A girl was walking up the drive. She looked 17, maybe 18, with a backpack over one shoulder and a sleeping bag rolled and strapped to the bottom of it. She wore a canvas jacket too thin for October and boots that were coming apart at the seams. Her hair was dark and pulled back, and she walked with her chin up, the way people do when they're trying to look like they know where they're going. She stopped 20 feet from Marcus and looked at the screen, then at the booth, then at him. This is the drive-in, she said. Used to be, Marcus said. She looked around the lot. Somebody lives here? I do. She shifted the backpack on her shoulder. She looked tired. Not sleepy tired, but worn tired, the kind that gets into the eyes. I'm not looking for trouble, she said. I didn't say you were, Marcus said. He set down the 2x4 he was holding. You eat today? She hesitated. This morning. Come inside, Marcus said. He made her a peanut butter sandwich and poured her a cup of instant coffee on the camp stove. She sat on the metal folding chair by the card table and ate without talking. He didn't ask questions. He went back to unloading lumber and let her sit. After a while, she came to the door of the booth. I could help, she said. I'm good with tools. Marcus looked at her. What's your name? Delia, she said. Delia Marsh. Marcus Cole, he said. He handed her the other end of a 2x4. Hold this level. She held it without question. Her grip was solid. They worked through the afternoon. She was good with tools, better than good. She used the framing hammer with authority, drove screws cleanly, measured twice before cutting. She didn't talk while she worked, which Marcus appreciated. At one point, she picked up the pry bar and worked a section of damaged baseboard free with a precision that suggested she'd done it before. At the end of the day, Marcus showed her the small storage room off the back of the workshop. It was 8x8, dry, with a concrete floor and a shelf. He'd been using it for supplies. I can move the supplies out, he said. There's a cot in the truck I haven't set up yet. She looked at the room, then at him. I'm not charity, she said. I know, Marcus said. You're labor. I need help and you need a place. That's a transaction, not a favor. She was quiet for a moment. Okay, she said. Marcus set up the cot and found a wool blanket in the box marked Marcus, clothes that he'd never opened. He set it on the cot and moved his supplies to the workbench. He didn't ask where she'd come from. He didn't need to. He recognized the look. He'd had it himself. 3 months ago, sitting on a bench in a bus station in Harrisburg with $217 and a broken zippered duffel. Some things didn't need explaining. Word moved through Colton the way it does in small towns, not through announcements or phone calls, but through the slow drift of information from person to person, the way water finds its level. Earl told the man who came in for deck screws that Walter Cole's nephew was fixing up the Starlight. The man told his wife, who told the woman at the post office, who told 3 people in the same afternoon. By the second week of October, people had started showing up. The first was a man named Roy Finch. He was 68, retired, with hands that looked like they'd been built for the specific purpose of gripping tools. He drove a rusted Dodge pickup and parked at the edge of the lot without announcing himself. He watched Marcus work for a few minutes, then climbed out and walked over. "Roy Finch," he said. "I was an electrician for 40 years. Walter helped me get my journeyman's card in 1978. Loaned me the money for the exam fee." Marcus looked at him. "Is that right?" "I owe him," Roy said. He nodded toward the cinder block building. "You got no panel in there. I can wire it right. Get you a proper breaker box. Run Romex to where you need outlets. GFCI in the kitchen area. 14-2 to the lights." He looked at Marcus. "I'll do it right." "I can't pay you what it's worth," Marcus said. Roy waved his hand. "Don't insult me." He had the panel roughed in by the end of the week. 3 days after Roy, a man named Pete Dolan arrived in a white work van with Dolan Plumbing stenciled on the side. He was 55, heavy through the shoulders, with a gray mustache. He walked through the building without speaking, opening cabinet doors and peering at the walls, then came back to Marcus. "Water heater's shot," he said. "Supply lines are old galvanized, should be copper or PEX. You'll want a proper kitchen hookup if you're doing what Earl says you're doing." He crossed his arms. "Walter fixed my furnace in 2002, midnight February, 20 below. Came out on a Sunday." He shook his head. "Never sent a bill." "He sounds like that," Marcus said. "He was exactly like that," Pete said. "Let me run you proper supply lines. 2 days of work, maybe 3. A woman named Helen Garza came the following Tuesday with the back of her pickup full of plants in nursery pots, ornamental grasses, native wildflowers, 3 small serviceberry shrubs. She was 60, with dirt permanently worked into the creases of her hands, and she moved around the perimeter of the lot with the focused energy of someone redesigning a space in their mind as they walked. "Walter built a raised planting bed for my mother when she couldn't get around well enough to garden at ground level," she said. "She used it for 7 years. It outlasted her." She set a serviceberry shrub at the northeast corner of the lot. "I'm putting these along the drive. Natives. They'll come back every year without help." Delia worked beside Helen without being asked, carrying pots and digging holes with a steel-handled spade she'd found on Walter's tool pegboard. A retired schoolteacher named Bernard dropped off 2 cords of firewood, split and stacked in the truck bed, and helped Marcus build a small covered woodshed along the south wall of the cinder block building. Bernard hadn't known Walter directly, he said, but Walter had quietly paid 3 months of Bernard's sister's property taxes during a year when her husband was sick and they couldn't make the payments. And Bernard had only found out when Walter died, and the records were sorted. They stacked the firewood in silence, passing splits hand to hand in a rhythm that needed no coordination. "Good wood," Marcus said. "White oak," Bernard said. "Burns long." The hearing was on a Tuesday evening, November 8th, in the Colton Township Meeting Hall, a low brick building behind the post office that smelled of folding chairs and old coffee. Marcus arrived early with Gail Pemberton, who carried a file folder 3 inches thick and moved through the room like she'd been in this specific building dozens of times before, which she had. The hall had a capacity of about 60. By the time the board called the meeting to order at 7 o'clock, there were 94 people in the room. Marcus counted. People were standing along the walls and sitting on the windowsills. He recognized Roy Finch and Pete Dolan and Helen Garza and Bernard and Jen from the Bluebird Diner and Diane from the storage office and Patricia from Briar Creek Savings and Loan, who had driven 40 minutes on a Tuesday evening. Gregory Howell sat at the applicant's table in his gray sport coat, flanked by a young associate in a blue suit and a woman with a laptop, who was projecting aerial photographs of the Starlight parcel onto the wall behind the board. The images were crisp and professional and showed the property at its most neglected. Cracked lot, broken speaker posts, the gap-toothed screen. The board chair was a woman named Lorraine Tice, 60-something, practical, with the manner of someone who had been running meetings since before Howell was in business school. She called the room to order and went through the procedural items quickly. Howell presented first. He was smooth and reasonable and precise. He talked about tax revenue and job creation and the commercial corridor along County Road 4. He had traffic studies and economic projections and a rendering of the proposed development that showed a clean, modern strip of buildings with landscaping and a parking lot. He mentioned that the parcel had been dormant for over 30 years and that the current structure had no viable commercial or residential use as is. He did not mention the covenant. Gail stood when Lorraine called her. The deed conveying this property to Marcus Cole contains a grantor's covenant, she said, holding up the documents. The parcel may not be converted to commercial use without the written consent of the Colton Township Historic Sites Committee. The drive-in is listed on the county's preliminary historic sites register. That covenant is valid and enforceable, and Mr. Howell's application does not address it. She set the documents on the board's table. The application should be denied on procedural grounds alone. Howell's associate leaned over and said something quietly. Howell's expression didn't change. Lorraine looked at the documents. "Is the applicant aware of this covenant?" Howell said smoothly. "We believe the covenant language is ambiguous and that a rezoning vote would not constitute conversion to commercial use in the sense intended by the grantor." Gail said without raising her voice, "I drafted the covenant. I know exactly what was intended." There was a murmur through the room. Lorraine held up one hand for quiet. "We'll hear from members of the public before the board deliberates." Earl Hutchins was the first to stand. He was in his canvas apron, which Marcus suspected he hadn't taken off before coming. He spoke without notes, turning the mechanical pencil in his hand the way he always did. "I knew Walter Cole for 32 years, Earl said. "He was a quiet man. He didn't announce himself. He didn't ask for recognition. He just showed up and did what needed doing." Earl looked at the board. He helped Roy Finch get his electrician's license. He drove 40 miles in February to fix Bernard Hughes's sister's furnace. He paid taxes for people who couldn't pay their own. He kept that land for 30 years, not because it was worth anything, but because he believed it would be worth something to the right person. Earl paused. "That person is his nephew. Marcus Cole moved onto that property with nothing, and he has spent the last 6 weeks fixing it up with his own hands. He's got a plan for it, and he's not going anywhere." Earl sat down. Roy Finch stood next and talked about the electrical work and what the building looked like now versus 6 weeks ago. Pete Dolan talked about the plumbing. Helen talked about the plantings and the drive, and the way the lot was starting to look like something instead of nothing. Jen from the Bluebird stood and said simply, "Walter Cole ate breakfast in my diner every Sunday for 20 years. He never once left without leaving a tip bigger than the meal. That's the kind of man he was. His nephew is that man's blood. That ought to count for something in this room." The room was quiet after that. Lorraine looked at Marcus. "Mr. Cole, do you want to say anything?" Marcus stood. He wasn't a practiced speaker. He stood with his hands at his sides and looked at the board. "I'm going to open a community woodworking shop," he said, "in the projection booth and the workshop behind it. Free classes for kids on Saturdays. Low-cost tool access for people doing their own repairs. A small gallery to sell locally made furniture. Starting with 6 pieces my uncle built over 30 years and left for me." He stopped. "I'm not going to sell the land. I'm not going to subdivide it. I'm going to do something with it that stays." He sat down. Lorraine conferred in a low voice with the 2 other board members. The room was very quiet. Howell sat with his portfolio closed, his hands folded on the table, his expression still pleasant. The deliberation took 11 minutes. Lorraine looked up. "The application is denied. The covenant is valid, and the proposed use is incompatible with the recorded restriction. The applicant may pursue legal remedy through the circuit court if he chooses. She looked at Howell. Mr. Howell, you're welcome to do that. But I'd note that this board does not look favorably on challenges to recorded covenants that were clearly and lawfully drafted. She closed the folder. Meeting adjourned. The room let out its breath all at once. Howell gathered his materials without expression. He shook Marcus's hand on the way out, a brief, firm shake, and said, "Good luck with your project." He meant it as a polite nothing, but Marcus nodded and said, "Thank you," and meant it as a full stop. Gail put her files in her bag and said, "Come see me Thursday and we'll close out the filing." She left without ceremony. Earl walked over and stood beside Marcus. The room was emptying slowly, people putting on coats and talking in low voices. "Well," Earl said. "Well," Marcus said. Earl put the pencil behind his ear. "You want a cup of coffee? Jen's probably still got the pot on." They walked to the Bluebird together through the cold November night, the streetlight catching the frost on the sidewalk, their boots loud on the pavement. The woodworking shop opened on the first Saturday of December. Marcus had spent 3 weeks on the interior after the hearing. He'd leveled the workshop floor. It had a 1/4-inch drop toward the east wall, using self-leveling compound he'd mixed by hand. He'd wired 3 overhead light fixtures with Roy's help. Proper 8-foot LED shop lights that turned the workshop bright as noon. Pete had run a utility sink in the corner with a hot water line off the new water heater. Helen had put window boxes outside the 2 new windows Marcus had cut into the south wall, and planted them with something she said would come back green in April. He'd mounted a sign above the workshop door. Not a fancy sign, just a piece of reclaimed oak from the Colton schoolhouse, the same oak Walter had used for the bookcase. Marcus had routed the letters himself, working slowly, checking his layout twice before he touched the wood. Cole Workshop. Below it, smaller, established by Walter Cole. Continued by Marcus Cole. The morning of the opening, Marcus woke before 5. He dressed in Carhartt pants and a flannel shirt and made coffee on what was no longer a camp stove, but a proper 2-burner range Roy had helped him hook up. He stood at the south-facing windows of the workshop and watched the sky go from black to gray to the pale, thin blue of early December. Delia was already in the workshop when he came in. She'd been there since 4:30. She was sanding the top of the walnut writing desk, Walter's desk, the one tagged for Marcus, made 2007, which they'd agreed to use as the shop's intake counter rather than sell. She was using 220 grit on a cork block, working with the grain in long, even strokes. "You don't have to do that," Marcus said. "I know," she said, and kept sanding. She had been at the Starlight for 6 weeks now. She'd told Marcus, in pieces and over time, that she'd left a situation in a town 2 counties east that she wasn't going back to. He didn't push for details. She was a natural woodworker, quick to understand joinery, patient with hand tools, exacting about fit. She'd made a small wall cabinet from scrap walnut in her 2nd week, dovetailed corners, fitted hinges, a magnetic catch on the door. It was better than anything Marcus had made. He'd told her so, plainly. She'd looked at it for a moment, then said, "The hinge gap's a little wide on the right side." "It's perfect," he said. She'd almost smiled. She was wearing an apron now, a heavy canvas shop apron Marcus had ordered from a supply catalog, her name stenciled on the bib in black ink. She had a room with a door that locked and a cot with a wool blanket and a shelf she'd built herself from scrap pine, neatly organized with the small things she'd accumulated. A toothbrush, a paperback, a photograph she'd never explained, a wooden box she was making. At 8 o'clock, Roy Finch arrived with a thermos of coffee and a folding table he'd brought from home. Pete Dolan came 20 minutes later with his wife, who brought a pan of cornbread wrapped in foil. Helen arrived with a flat of winter pansies for the window boxes. Bernard came with his hands in his pockets and looked around the workshop with quiet approval and said, "Walter would have liked this." Jen walked up from the Bluebird at 9 with a full carafe and a paper bag of pastries. She looked at the sign above the door for a long time. Then she came inside and set the carafe on the walnut desk and didn't say anything about the sign. She didn't need to. At 9:30, the first family arrived. 2 parents and a boy about 10 who stood in the workshop doorway with his hands jammed in his pockets and looked at the tools. The way Marcus must have looked at Walter's workshop that first night, with the particular attention of someone who has never been shown something, but somehow already knows it matters. "You teach kids?" the father asked. "Saturday mornings," Marcus said. "Free. He can start today if he wants." The boy looked up. Marcus pulled a marking gauge from the pegboard, the one labeled "marking gauges," the brass plate engraved in Walter's careful hand, and set it on the bench. "You know what this does?" Marcus said. The boy shook his head. "I'll show you," Marcus said. He did. Marcus waited until everyone had gone home that evening. He stood in the empty workshop in the last of the day's light, which came through the south windows at a low angle and caught the dust motes hanging in the still air. The lantern was on the workbench. He still used it sometimes, out of habit. The Coleman lantern that had been waiting for him on the card table the night he arrived. He walked through the booth into the projection room and stood at the porthole windows, looking out over the lot. The speaker posts that Roy had helped him cut flush were gone now, the holes filled with gravel. The berm on the west side had been regraded. Helen's serviceberry shrubs were small, barely knee-high, but they were planted, and they would come back. The screen was still there. Marcus hadn't touched it. He'd thought about tearing it down. The steel frame was salvageable and the plywood facing was a loss, but he'd left it standing. It was the thing that told you what this place had been. It seemed wrong to take it down. He'd have to address it eventually, brace the rust-damaged crossbars at minimum. But for now it stood against the December sky, and that felt right. He went back through the booth and out the steel door, and up the outside ladder he'd bolted to the south wall of the building, 12 feet of steel rung up to the flat section of roof. He'd put a piece of half-inch plywood up there, weatherproof, for sitting. He climbed up and sat on it with his back against the slight pitch of the roof peak. The lot spread below him. The pines were dark and still. Beyond the pines, the fields, and beyond those, the lights of Colton glowing orange against the low clouds. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. The 4-page letter was there. Walter's handwriting, blue ink, small and precise. He'd read it many times now, often enough that some lines came to him without looking, the way a song does when you've heard it enough times. Your mother loved you every single day. He'd pressed the letter carefully each time after reading, refolded it on its original creases, put it back in its envelope, put the envelope in his pocket. He didn't open it tonight. He just held it. He set the envelope on his knee and looked at the lot below him, at the workshop with its new windows lit warm from inside where he'd left the shop lights on by accident, at the screen standing against the sky, at the serviceberry shrubs in a row along the drive. He set the envelope on the plywood beside him and put his hand flat on it. He thought about what Earl had said. Walter didn't think about it. He thought about the savings bonds and the furniture tags and the 30 years of deposits. He thought about a man driving 40 miles to stand at a grave with carnations from a gas station. He thought about the rocking chair built for a porch Marcus hadn't had yet, built in 1994, when Marcus was 7 years old and someone was imagining a future for him. The wind moved through the pines. He thought about Delia, sanding the walnut desk at 4:30 in the morning, working with the grain in long, even strokes. He thought about the boy with his hands in his pockets, looking at a marking gauge like it was a map of somewhere he wanted to go. He picked up the envelope and held it loosely. This is what it means to receive something. Not to be given money or land or tools, but to be given the proof that someone thought about you, that someone sat in a sealed room with a lantern and a set of chisels and spent an evening building you a chair for a porch you didn't have yet because they believed the porch was coming. That's the weight of it, not the chair. The belief. The shop light below caught the frost on the gravel and turned it briefly gold before a cloud crossed and the light went ordinary again. Marcus folded the envelope into his jacket pocket and looked out at the lot for a long time. Helping somebody isn't something you do to feel good about yourself. It's just something you do. And then it keeps going, forward and outward from person to person, a chain of small and ordinary acts that no single person can trace from one end to the other. Walter had received it from Caroline and given it to Marcus. Marcus had received it and was giving it to Delia, and Delia would give it to someone else in some form someday, in a way neither of them could predict. The chain didn't start with Walter. It didn't end with Marcus. It just kept going. The shop light in the window below stayed on. He'd meant to turn it off, but from up here it looked right. A warm rectangle against the dark, visible from the road, visible from the drive. The kind of light that tells you a place is occupied and alive and open to whoever needs it. He sat on the roof for another hour, his jacket collar up, the letter in his pocket, the frost coming down slow and quiet on the lot below. Then he climbed down the ladder, went inside, and left the light on.